Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Project 180. This is where we turn your projects around, and we do that by bringing in experts from all kinds of different industries to talk about project leadership, project management, and how to manage your work that much better. Today, we're going to be chatting with an old friend of mine, Kevin Judge. Emphasis on the old. Uh, uh, but we've done this a few times on this little broadcast that we do. So thanks, Kevin, for joining again. Kevin's the CEO of Ennoble, based in Ottawa as well, and one heck of a leadership consultant. Kevin, you want to maybe just introduce yourself a little bit?
I don't know if I can do better than that introduction, but thanks very much, Kevin. Yeah, very excited to be here and talking to you today about leveraging AI for competitive advantage. I guess there's so many things I could say, but I just want to talk a little bit real quick about why this is a passion for me. So I'm currently doing a Doctor of Business Administration through the Swiss School of Business Management, and my topic is leveraging AI for competitive advantage. So really excited about this relevant, timely topic, and sharing what I have with the group.
That's great, thanks. And it's amazing that you're doing that, and nice to get to repurpose, some of this stuff that you're learning. But it also just goes to show that you're not just somebody who's like, hey, I'm kind of interested now. You are literally studying this and looking for ways to actually educate yourself and others on this. So it's a very hot topic for you.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of, and there's actually a good group of people. We've got about 14, 15 people in the room. If anybody has questions, comments at any time, you can type it in the chat. That's fine. If you want to just unmute and jump in, that's fine too. We will wrap this up at about 1-ish Eastern time. But just so you know, it's not just for Kevin and I to chat. We would really love for you both, for everyone to be engaged as well. So Kevin, first question, as we dive into this AI thing, because I hear AI is everywhere, right? Like you can't Google it anymore because it's just billions and billions of responses, and LinkedIn is just full of people talking about it. And I know there's many subtopics and issues around AI, but for the context of today, what does AI really mean for you, and what's that driving force that makes it really interesting for you?
Yeah, so it's funny, if I scroll through Facebook, which I try not to do too much, but there's tons of things like 28-day challenges of how to be better at AI, et cetera. And sure, for a lot of people, AI is about going into ChatGPT and saying, I've got these 5 ingredients in my fridge, what can I make for dinner? Or putting your face on a ballerina or whatever it is, right? There's all sorts of fun little things that you can do with AI. But for me, AI is not about the technology in itself. It's more of the business impact of AI, right? What can you do with it? So like you said, there's a whole bunch of subtopics around it, and the terminology around AI is huge and confusing for a lot of people. So for me, the real focus and what drives my interest is how is it that organizations today and the people within those organizations can really use AI to create that competitive advantage. And there's a huge need to do that today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of goes like, and anytime there's new technology, whether it's electricity, or the internet, like everybody starts to try and figure out what it's useful for, because it's this new thing. No one ever even really imagined what this could do before, and all of a sudden it's just there, and now everyone's jostling for position, right? So that's kind of what businesses are doing now, in your view, is not just because they've already got their market analysis, they've already got their business plans, they've already got all this stuff. How does AI help support getting something from in here in the head in your brain out to market?
Yeah, and that's a really top of mind question. So I'll share real quick with you that there's some research that came out from PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC. They do an annual CEO survey, and in there they've identified in 2024 that 45% of CEOs doubt the viability of their business in the next 10 years, unless they really, really figure out how can they change how they create, deliver, and capture value. And that means that they're having to go back to those big plans and look at, how are we creating value? What can we do differently? And 70% of those CEOs believe that generative AI is actually going to make this happen in the next 3 years. So there's definitely a lot of emphasis on AI, but I guess I'll share one of my favorite quotes, and this is actually a me quote. I woke up in the middle of the night and wrote it down. Just because you can spell AI doesn't mean you're ready for AI, right? So there's a lot of organizations that are like, oh yeah, we need to use AI, but they don't know how. They don't know what they're going to do and how to translate it into that business value.
I think part of the problem, the challenge, we don't like problems, right? We like challenges. Is that it's so nebulous, and I'll equate it very loosely to like the whole agile development thing that erupted, 20, 25 years ago, that there's this new method of doing things and then everybody gets it wrong. Right. And some companies manage to figure out how to iterate on their development and how to iterate different things, and they manage to ride a nice wave and they get it. And a lot of places don't. And they just kind of struggle and churn chaos all the time. They still hit maybe a degree of success, but they're not quite what these other folks maybe got to. AI seems kind of similar in that, well, I got this thing, and you don't know what to do with it, right? Like the joke about, putting your face on a ballerina or figuring out a recipe or something like that. That's great. And that's the kind of stuff that I, use AI for in my, leisure time or whatever, like funny pictures or, helping write an article or something like that. But to really leverage it and to make it valuable, like where does a CEO or a leader start in trying to figure out how do I use this tool to really push myself and the business forward?
Yeah. So for me, every leader, every employee, every organization needs to go through a process of what I call an AI adoption roadmap. And the first step in that is to just master the AI basics, right? So that question you asked me at the beginning, what is AI, right? Even the question of, is AI here to stick around, or is it a fad? And to you and me, I think it's like, well, duh, it's here to stick around. It's not going anywhere. But I've talked to some executives at technology venture capital firms that are kind of hedging their bets and thinking, maybe this is a fad and it's going to disappear. Because over the years, since as far back as the 1950s, AI has been around, and it's had its ups and downs, right? But I think what's really different today is that AI is in the hands of everybody, whereas it used to just be researchers that were working with AI. So there's a big difference today. So the first part is, mastering those AI basics. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be a prompt engineer or anything. Just get your head around, like, what is AI? What can it do at a high level? Then for the organization, it's about defining what is our future state. What do we want to do with AI? What are our first steps with that? And then defining what are some use cases. How can they actually use AI to create value in that organization? And that isn't something that leaders should be doing in a silo. All right, they need to invite the expertise from across their organization, different levels, even engaging their clients and their key stakeholders in those discussions of what can we do. And I've heard some really great examples of some things that people have done around that. So here we are, still, we haven't really done anything other than identify what do we want to do and how, what do we want to do with it. Next is to actually prepare for the adoption of AI in the organization. And there's a bunch of stuff behind that, like readying your data, readying your people, etc. And then the last one is to execute and evolve. And Kevin, you mentioned about the agile work and about continually evolving, and that's the same thing for AI, right? We start off with a small, simple use case, we test it out, we get it working, and then we redefine what do we want to do next with AI and grow it and adopt it, and then evolve again, going back and continuing to expand what we're doing.
Okay, there's a lot there.
There is.
I jotted down a few things. I have a couple of things I want to pick on. The fad issue. I know AI writ large is not a fad, just like I mentioned electricity. This is never going to catch on. Yeah, it is. I have lights all over my house. Like it's a big deal now.
Yeah.
I can understand the fad side of it. Not that it's not there's so much buzz about it. It's just got this kind of candy element. It's like, okay, well, it's everyone's talking about it. It's like being talked about a lot. It's this excitement, but it's still going to be a matter of something that has to mature and grow. So there's still this newness to it, and to your point, like, yes, it's been available to researchers, and HP or whatever has been able to use these kind of things for universities for decades. But not everybody's been able to use it. So it's got this fun, exciting kind of quality right now. And there's no legislation around it, or it's burgeoning legislation around it in terms of like, copyright. Right? You can't just go off and write a book in the style of Stephen King because Stephen King wants to sue you for using his material. Like, there's that element of it too. So I understand it's not even fad, I guess, but there's this uncertainty about it. So you might want to just kind of relegate it to, I want it to figure itself out before I really jump in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's there, and like everybody's going to start using it. So you want to build some consistency in your organization so people aren't tackling it in different ways. If you're running a company that's 10,000 people, you can't have 10,000 approaches to this new thing, because that's actually going to just slow your momentum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now everybody's dabbling in different ways, and they don't talk to each other, and now it's a big mess. So you're right in terms of coming up with that strategy and seeing that through.
Kevin, you've just made me think of the biggest lie that's out there around AI, and you mentioned these legislation and that and organizations that are like 10,000 strong, and how are they using AI? The biggest lie when it comes to AI is when organizations say we're not using AI. Because the truth is, whether the organization is formally using it or not, their employees likely have ChatGPT or something like that on their phone, and they're sitting on the toilet using ChatGPT to figure out, how do I respond to my boss about this email?
There's only one laugh emoji on that.
That's right.
I just want to bring that up. There was only one. I was expecting more. Anyway, go on.
There we go. There we go. Right. So picture that your employees are using it, but are they using it in a formal way? And the formality of organizations and law and legislation and all of that. So I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you right now, all of that is probably 5 to 10 years behind where everybody else is. Right.
Well, sorry, I'm just clicking admit because somebody's just joining.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of the legislative side, and you're right, like people are just using it. It's like, I've used it at my day job, and again, it's like, I'm using it for brainstorming. I need a plan for something, but I can't quite figure out how to start. So I put a few prompts in, and that's enough to kind of get me rolling. But now, can our company say, oh, we don't use AI? No, because literally I just did. So you make a good point there. So in terms of having this, I want to go back to another point you made too, actually, in terms of, the company already had a plan pre-AI, right? You're selling widgets, right? You're getting widgets out in the world. So ultimately, your goal is still to sell widgets, but now you've got to be an AI company and
Mm.
figure out how to sell your widgets with this. And you have to actually do a deep dive into what tools to use. Is it really going to benefit me? Yes or no? In what ways? Like you really have to reflect on that. So how does the company, or even the CEOs that you might talk to, how do they go, well, is this really worth it to formalize, or is it okay just to let everybody kind of mess around with it and maybe something will bubble up?
Yeah, and that's the right question to be asking. And the piece that stands out for me in what you just said there is, does it make sense? Is the investment right for us to do this, right? You don't have to become an AI company. I think it's inevitable. It's almost like a company saying, well, we're not going to use personal computers just because everybody else has started to use them,
Yeah.
right? Well, it's going to happen. And it's already embedded in so many things that we're using. Like when you go to type text and it suggests your next words, well,
Mm.
there you go. There's some artificial intelligence working in the background, right? Or when you watch Netflix and it suggests to you, hey, here's some other TV shows or movies that we think that you would like. Well, there's some artificial intelligence in the background that's working on that, right? So it's there. In terms of decision making from an organization, you need to look at, what is your risk tolerance? Do you have a low risk tolerance or a high risk tolerance? And then from that strategic perspective, what is it that you want to do with your organization? Do you want to reduce costs, or do you want to differentiate yourself from all of the other competitors? And so depending on where you fit, you could use those two axes and draw a simple 4-box grid and determine, are you going to do some incremental projects that are small and specific, or are you going to be completely disruptive and try and disrupt your industry or your market with AI innovations? If you're looking for the whole cost saving side of things, is there some processes that you might be able to automate? Is there some processes that you might be able to help get better information about quicker?
Mhm.
Or are you looking to do a complete operations overhaul using AI? Right. So again, it's that, what is your strategy and what's your risk tolerance for it? I would suggest that many organizations, as they go through the maturity levels of using AI, start with the small, simple little projects,
Mhm.
and start to see some successes around those before they get into some of the big, massive things, unless they've got a high risk tolerance and a huge budget available to them.
Yeah.
Then go for it, right?
Interesting with the risk tolerance, because you don't necessarily, to put this in project management speak, right? You don't have a risk management plan. You don't know, like, because it's the unknown at this point. You don't know what the impacts, positive or negative, might be. So your
Yeah.
point of starting on small things, and it's just kind of bubbling around the organization, just like spell check was 30 years ago, right? Like, oh no, the editors were all upset. I remember at Nortel, like, oh, we're gonna lose our jobs because we got spell and grammar checkers now in the word processor.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. Like they were still obviously needed. So
Yeah.
so to make any rash decisions now based on, well, I think AI is going to take care, we're going to be able to let go of all these people because we'll make more money. Like that's just not the strategy, right?
Yeah. The whole idea of everyone's going to lose their jobs and we're going to have universal wages, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how many years we've been in our careers. If you think back to the introduction of computers, the same myths
Mm-hmm.
were spoken, right? Computers are going to take away everybody's jobs. Computers, everybody's not going to have to work. They'll sit at home and do nothing. Well, how'd that work out? They
Yeah.
actually created more jobs.
Yeah.
They just changed the way people do the work. And so that's the thing with AI, right? So AI, in one sense, might actually bring sub performers up to a level of adequateness.
Mm-hmm.
But on the upper end of things, you could take people that are high performing and make them exceptional, like way up there, being able to do numerous things. So one of the things that we have to do in terms of making sure that an organization is ready for AI is about making sure that our employees are aware of what AI is, that we're doing some workforce planning around what skills and knowledge do people need to have 3 to 5 years from now. What can we do to develop that, right? This whole idea of, oh, let's just lay off a whole bunch of people because we'll just get new talent, is kind of dumb. Because you've got talent right now that knows your company, potentially likes your company, and potentially trusts your company, right? So why get rid of them? Well, why not actually help them to be more successful in your organization? It's cheaper, and it's going to really have a long-term benefit for your organization.
I think, and I saw Cheng, some applause there. Thank you. I agree. Ultimately, because it's such a huge shift for so many industries, and it's hard to, it's already kind of think sounds cliche to say, oh, this is a big disruptive thing across all, like, but it is. Right? It just is. Really, what it is a change management challenge. I see when you kind of boil it down, right? Like the leadership, the folks that you work with, really need to be able to clearly understand it, but also be able to articulate to the organizations what this is going to mean. Because people operating in a vacuum, especially when they see the headlines, oh, layoffs because AI can now write better code, or what, like, it can't, at least not yet. But that doesn't mean it's going to replace you. That means, like, oh my God, you'll be able to produce stuff that's 10 times better than the stuff you're producing 2 years ago. But the messaging isn't maybe there yet. Is it just a product of, it's just so new that everybody's still kind of in that chaotic stage, or is this an element of maybe a lack of skill or lack of communication skills, maybe in leadership?
Yeah, well, I think, well, first of all, you mentioned about people being in a vacuum, right? Our brains are expert storytellers, right? When we don't have the information that we need, our brains quickly make up stories. The problem is they're expert storytellers that focus in on fictional horror, right? So we immediately think, my boss didn't say hello to me today, so that must mean that I'm meeting with HR later and I'm getting fired, right? Well, it could just be that they weren't feeling well and they were running to the bathroom. I don't know, or whatever. So we have to remember that as leaders and communicators, whether you're a formal leader or not, we have to give people the information about what it is and what it isn't, where we're going with it, what we know and what we don't know yet, right? It's okay to say, well, we haven't quite figured this out yet, but we're working on it, and we'd really value your input on it, or not, right? Whatever it is. The other thing to consider is your leaders are perhaps a baby step ahead of everybody else. Like, there's so many leaders that don't know themselves. What are we going to do with AI? Because there's now this additional thing that they've got to consider. And so that's where I'd say that leadership alignment is really, really important as a first step for every organization, to make sure that all of their leaders are aligned on what are we doing, what are we not doing, who's getting involved, how much of an investment are we making, what resources are we putting on this, how are we communicating this out, before starting to go and experimenting with different solutions.
Good point. I just want to pause there for a second. We've got a bunch of people on the call, so if anybody, just a reminder, if you want to throw in a comment, question, you can text it, or you can also just unmute and then jump in anytime. And I know a couple of you, and I'm going to point at Mark, but I know there's some folks, because I know him, so I can pick on him, that might have some thoughts. So please jump in anytime. The project management side, I mean, there's one thing that's, leadership writ large. We've kind of like talked about that upper sphere of a lot of organizations, but now we're going to narrow it a little. In terms of managing projects, and we'll go like specific. I'm in tech right now, so you're building a new version of software, and you are asked, "Hey, how can AI help us?" What? And you don't know because it's so freaking new. You don't know, right? You don't know what's going to help or hinder, what the right next step are. You're a bit clueless, as most of us are at this point. How do you work with your project team to support them? And again, the example of like a new version of software, so whatever it might be, to work through that and not start stepping on each other and getting in each other's way. Trying all this new AI stuff.
Yeah. It's funny because 3 years ago I would have said, well, you should just Google that. But today my answer would be, and I'm kind of being cheeky here, you should just go into ChatGPT and say, hey, how can I leverage AI as a project manager to help, right? And it's going to come back in milliseconds with tons of great answers, and perhaps some hallucinatory answers and junk, right? So and so then you need to filter through that. But that's kind of tongue in cheek. I think the best thing, like if you've got a team of project managers and you're trying to figure out, well, what can we do with AI? Leverage your team and the insights that your team has on that. Actually pull them together. And if you're the formal or informal leader of that team, to just say, hey, here's the challenge that we have. Let's talk about this for an hour and brainstorm. What can we be using this for? What have you seen in other organizations? What have you tried yourself? What ideas do you have? What have you read from various articles or seen in different talks, etc.? And try and come up with some use cases around that. One really great example of this. So Dan Premichuk is on the call with us today from Carleton University. I call it the TIM project. I'm not sure if I've got the naming quite right there, but I went to a session that they offered, which was around brainstorming use cases. And there was people from all sorts of different industries, different levels of organizations getting together to talk about how could we leverage AI to make a difference in what we're doing. And some of the examples that came out of that, I forget how long it was. I think we had 45 minutes to brainstorm with each other, but there were some pretty powerful things that came out of that. So there's no reason why you couldn't do that with your team, right? And it's the same sort of thing that I would have done back in 1997 when I was a business systems analyst and there was a problem with SAP that needed to be sorted out. And I just pulled the programmers and myself into a room to say, hey, here's the problem. Let's brainstorm how to fix it. Right. So,
what makes me laugh? I'll tell you what makes me laugh, because you're not in my head. You don't know, but it makes me laugh because you're trying to figure out this new technology that so many people can use kind of in isolation to develop the next document, the next code, the next whatever. And the solution is what? Get everybody in a room and talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. Just like you would have with your SAP problem 100 years ago.
Exactly.
I've done the same thing over the years, and it's funny, is I find it too in like a remote work environment like we have, sort of many of us have now. The communication is that much harder sometimes. But if like it's just a matter of, okay, guys, we're going to schedule a 12 o'clock on Wednesday call just to kick this around. There's not, you don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to have all this thing. Just you have to mimic though that conversation that people would naturally maybe have if they were stuck together in a room or a building.
Yeah.
But And Mark, thank you. And just in the chat, you're pointing out why AI won't replace project managers. I think that's very true. I've found AI helps develop, the plan. Well, what like help me with the risk management plan on X, because I can't get my head around it. Boom, it comes up with some ideas, and that kind of is inspiring. But it can't do all the cross communication, cross organizational communication as effectively.
And you know what? AI is a really great thought partner
Hmm.
for these sorts of things. But you have to have human intervention in order to ensure that you've got a result that is going to be meaningful and something that you can implement within your organization, right? The human brings the sanity to the data that's being pulled and will really help to make those final decisions. And so that's where I think employees are going to gravitate to, where they'll be doing less of the, hey, let's try and come up with all of the data,
Hmm.
and more of the, okay, here's the data, and what does it mean, and how do we apply that to what we're doing?
Like I think of an example, and I see Mark and Dan, you both made comments. I would like to pull you in if you'd be willing in a minute. But the idea of there's a lot of tools now you can record these meetings.
Mhm.
You get a nice transcript, you get all that, and then it'll automatically spit out all of your action items and stuff like that. How
Love
many
that.
meetings have you had, right, in the last, again, 100 years? How many meetings have you had where somebody forgot to write down the action items? 2 weeks later, you have your check-in, and everybody remembers the thing a little bit differently. And it's not that they're dummies. It's not that they're bad people or bad at their job. It's just that you forgot to write down that one thing, and there's a cascading effect. Simple AI tool, it's just capturing, Kevin said this, and the other Kevin said this, and da da da, and then this was the agreed upon statement. It's super helpful. Even if it doesn't get it 100% right, you can at least have a document that you can look at and then adjust as you need to.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of that work away, so you can really just focus on this communication and not writing everything down.
Yep. Yeah,
And
exactly. Now,
that's AI, and it's been a huge boon for me personally, because I don't have to write, like, I'm always writing stuff down, but I'm always worried that I'm going to miss the next important thing because I'm writing down the last important thing, right?
oh, exactly. So now you can actually focus your time on the conversation rather than trying to capture all of the notes.
Yeah.
Now there might be some people that are nervous that say, well, it's usually my job to take the notes in a meeting. But okay, so then let's find something that's of greater value for you to do in the meeting. But it's like in the old days, this is before me, but in the old days, if somebody wanted a letter written, they'd send it to the typing pool, where a bunch of people in the 60s and 70s
This is
would have
before
been
us, by the way. I just
before us, right? I watched Mad Men, but right. So, well, when computers came around, we started typing our own stuff, and
Yeah.
eventually the people that couldn't type retired, and now like your 3-year-old can type.
I may have told you this one before. When 1995, I'll date myself. That was my first job. I had just turned 22. Okay, so that's how old I am. But I was at Nortel, and I was in the technical documentation department, or one of the many technical documentation departments in this giant organization. And we had an entire team of people whose job it was to wait for it, make PDF documents.
Cool.
Right? That was their job. And in the
Wow.
90s, you can imagine, like, the computer in your desk was as big as a house, right? Like, to process FrameMaker documents, and they made CD-ROMs. Remember CD-ROMs? That was a thing. It was like newfangled at the time. But you put all these PDFs onto a CD, and you send the CDs out to customers, so they didn't have to send them 10,000-page books.
All of the manuals.
Yeah, the manuals that were wrote. So it was all on a CD. But anyway, one person's, or like 3 or 4 people's jobs were literally taking our files and hitting the button to make PDFs, right? And it would take hours because the computers were slow back in those days, and that was their whole job. But then like exactly the scenario you just described. A couple of years later, all of a sudden, anybody can just click save as PDF, and boom, it's done. Well, they were freaking out. What? Oh, it's my job now. Well, what do you want it to be? Right? That was an opportunity for those folks to do other things. And like, yes, we're still going to need you to make sure that PDFs are built properly and the standards and that, but it's an opportunity to elevate what you're working on and
Now,
elevate your skill set.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing here, because we talked earlier about really making sure that organizations are clear on what talents are they going to need in the future. There's a recent stat that I saw that said 10% of people that responded to the survey have no idea what talent they're going to need in the future, which I think is just a real shame. But as employees, as project managers, whoever you are in your career, you can't depend and wait on the organization to figure out what you need to be. You need to take charge of your career and figure that out for yourself and show how you can provide value. You and I know AI is here to stay. We're pretty darn sure that that's going to happen. So if you aren't already starting to experiment with that, read articles, go to events like this and learn about it, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So for everybody that's here, congratulations. I'm so glad that you're here because one, Kevin McGowan is a rock star, but two, because you're upping your game when it comes to AI.
No, I appreciate the plug, but you're right, and I think this is actually a good point because Cheng asked a question in text. How can project managers effectively leverage AI in their workflows when their organization isn't actively adopting AI tools? I think you're saying exactly that. And Cheng, feel free to follow up here, but the idea of taking on the responsibility yourself. You can just go to the website, chat GPT, and start typing stuff and playing with it and doing whatever you want to do with it. But really it comes down to learning, because if your organization's not quite sure what to do, that's a heck of an opportunity for you to look like a leader in your own organization and say, well, here's the plan. Here's what I think we should do.
Yeah. And I'm just reading through the rest of the chat. There's some really good stuff there from Dan and good question from Steve. But the last comment I'm seeing, I want to just add on to here is Dan saying, hey, critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, or sometimes I call it, strategic thinking type skills, trying to look at things from that bigger picture. All of those are really, really good things to be able to figure out. Not everybody has to be an amazing prompt engineer, but you need to figure out at least a little bit, how can I put a basic prompt into generative AI so that you can get an answer? And the best way is to experiment with that. And there's lots of resources that are out there on how to do prompt. They call it prompt engineering. Doesn't mean you have to be an engineer, right?
Right. Makes it sound fancy though.
Yes.
Mark, I saw you come on camera. There's something
just a couple of things. Definitely, and I just put there. It's EQ, not the IQ, right? The technology can make up for some of the IQ. It can make up for some of the manual labor, but it's not going. And it can correlate data, but it can't do a stakeholder analysis. It can't actually lead people to a successful outcome. It can support you, but it can't do that work. And I think where before, back in the old days, scope, schedule, and resource, right? And that's all anyone pushed. Can I now put a scope statement, get it generated out of ChatGPT? Absolutely. Are there AI-based scheduling tools? Absolutely. The days of trying to figure out how a tool is going to do resource management and allow you to push when you lose a resource without it breaking your schedule and having to reload it. Those things will all happen. You talk about PDF generation, and I'll go one step in history back. bringing those tools to answer her question, like what can you do now? I remember earlier in my career, showing up at a client site with a dual floppy laptop that allowed me to create workflow diagrams.
Hmm.
Instead of bringing out my little green plastic stencil and my pencil and my graph paper and try and regenerate somebody else's workflow. And the first time I hit enter and it printed off somewhere and I handed it to them, I said, "There's your new workflow." They thought I was coming from another planet. It's the but why would they do it? Well, I wasn't like I was stuffing it down their throat. I was just saying, hey, there's another way. I don't want to sit up at night. You're not paying me enough, number one. I don't want to sit up at night with my stencil and my number 2 pencil and graph this, and then you tell me tomorrow, oh, can you change this one thing? No, I'll change it right now, buddy.
Yeah.
Right. It's deciding what is important to try and for lack of a better term, automate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Than anything else, I think.
It's interesting, Mark. I really appreciate what you said. I have one of those stencils, by the way. But I'm remembering there's a researcher named Josh Bersin who's done a lot of work around organizations, and he talks about 3 different pieces: alignment, efficiency, and effectiveness. And you've made me think about those 3. AI can help with the efficiency side, but there's still the other 2 legs of the stool. Is what we're doing aligned with what makes sense, and is it effective, right? So yeah, you said stakeholder analysis. Well, you could ask ChatGPT or AI to do a stakeholder analysis, but it wouldn't take into consideration the nuances of individuals, etc. So it wouldn't be effective, right? So I love your point, Mark.
I can jump in for a sec. I think to that example, let's say you're new, or you're just jumping into a new project or something. You need to do a stakeholder analysis. AI is a great tool to say, how do I do this? What questions should I ask? You've got textbooks, you've got websites, you've got lots of opportunities to learn this, but it might be just enough to get you going. And then you actually have to still go do the work. But it cuts down, that 3 or 4 hours you may have been scribbling notes. Oh, I got to ask Bob about this, and I got to ask Kevin about this, and Mark about this. Like, it just gives you maybe a little framework that you can then use and then adapt later.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a brainstorming session right here, because now I've just thought, well, hey, if there's enough really good data around projects and stakeholder analysis going back in history, and the players are the same, you could, using AI, get a real quick sense of, in the last 10 projects, Bob Robertson has been the most difficult person to convince in all of these projects. So the likelihood is you need to put emphasis on Bob Robertson this time, right? So you could do some sort of analysis to identify your higher risk individuals.
That's true. And I like how Dan's throwing in the comment, brainstorming session with no current AI involved. So go team. So,
that's right. It's embedded in my brain.
Are you
Cheng
sure
has
we're not
a
AI? Cheng, please unmute. Go ahead.
I have a question. So a question that came to mind was, what ethical considerations should project managers be aware when integrating AI into their project workflows? Or also, like, how much details can a PM, put into, let's say, like ChatGPT before, like, it's too much, like too much info, or shouldn't be putting into ChatGPT like that?
I mean, like, kind of giving up your information into the monolith kind of situation, like how much you need to share?
Yeah. Great, great question of, are you training the overall, as Kevin put it, in the monolith of AI? Like, are you training AI from the data that you're putting in, or do you have a closed system that's secure and your data stays within your own enterprise? Those are certainly things to be considering. I can just picture right now a chief security officer rocking back and forth in a corner somewhere, thinking, "Oh my gosh, where there's so much risk associated with the data that we're putting into this." You know, even I've talked to some people that say, "Well, we're not supposed to be using AI, but I'm filtering the data that I'm putting in on my own ChatGPT account and trying to cleanse it from any employee data. Yet there's still risk, I know, of putting information in the first place. I know I've made that mistake in the past, where I've put information in that it came back and referred to somebody, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought I left that person's name out of everything I put in. How did it know?" Right? So,
Yeah.
you know, the whole data side of things is a big challenge on what are you putting in, what is okay to put in, what are your policies on that, what are the risks associated with if other people get that data.
And I think it goes back to one of your, and I know Mark, you've got your hand up too, but I think that goes back to one of your original comments, was that part of the plan, having that roadmap. Here's where we want to go with this. And you do have to consider, it's not just, hey, we can really boost productivity, hey, 25% more widgets or whatever. It's about security. It's about securing your own data. And do you want it in a closed system? Or are you willing to put up, you know, the benefits of an open system versus a closed system? So yeah, there's a lot to consider. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a flip side of that too, and to James said something that reminded me of that, and I was going to say earlier, and that's the data sources that the AI is using. You know, how much risk are you putting in by using a particular source, right? Are you using X's AI? Are you using ChatGPT? Are you using, you know, whose are you using? So as an example, specific to project management, there is a organization, I guess is the best way of calling it, called Praxis, who has a methodology, you know, does a lot of their own thinking about how project management should be run. They have used their own systems to curate the data that go into their AI. So if you ask a project management question into their engine, you can be sure the sources of the data versus asking the same question of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right. Because you don't know where that data is coming from. You might have inference by terms being used or a particular statistic being provided. But like, you know, a year ago, I was asked to participate in a book, and we put this book out, and the Praxis folks came and said, "Hey, this is really interesting work that you guys have done. Can we import this book into our AI engine?" So, you know, it was like, oh, okay, they are purely curating the data. So I'm going to trust that more than I'm going to trust a ChatGPT output.
Great point, because there may be nefarious players out there that are adding data into these models that is incorrect, and we see that a lot, or suspect that a lot, when it comes to information about politicians and government issues and stuff like that. Right, a lot of false information.
Yeah, that's actually, it's a perfect little segue, because we've got about 5 minutes to go. But I wanted to ask you, Kevin, because we're building up to this point where, you know, what if AI goes wrong? You know, what if it is feeding you something that, like, that has to be part of your plan. You have to anticipate that, yes, you're going to ask it questions and you're going to ask it to produce report on blah blah blah. But you can't just take it, copy paste, and deliver it to the CEO like it's gospel, right? There still has to be this curation and editing process has to go with it. So how do you recommend that organizations look at that as well, in terms of like the risk of bringing misinformation into your organization.
Yeah, you've reminded me, and I don't know the story 100%, but wasn't there a lawyer that brought forward a bunch of case law in court, and it turned out that ChatGPT had completely made it all up? So
I missed
that was,
that. That's a good one though.
yeah, so a very early lesson. So we have to make sure again that human intervention is in there to say, this is what I'm getting out of ChatGPT or AI, and does it make sense? Is it correct? I know that in the past, I, as part of my prompts, will ask ChatGPT for sources of information. But I also know that sometimes it makes those sources up. So, don't just take the fact that it says, oh, I got this from People magazine. Well, you want to go, that's not a source I use. But anyway, you want to make sure that you go there.
What does
and
Brad Pitt think about AI?
That's right. You want to make sure that you actually go there and see the content so that you can properly source it, right? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, that's many good points. We've got a couple minutes to go. I want to throw it out there and see if anybody else has a question or comment they'd like to throw in. Feel free to just unmute and go for it. Yeah, I'm waiting the uncomfortable 5 seconds to see if anybody wanted to jump on that. And that's fine. Kevin, maybe we can wrap it there.
Sure.
But I just want to say again, thank you so much for chatting. This is very enlightening for me, and I think for everybody else too. We will be doing these. It's every 2 weeks, because every week is a little much. So we're doing these every 2 weeks. So if you're on LinkedIn, watch on LinkedIn for the next couple of announcements. I've got them all booked and ready to go. So you'll see those in the next, well, probably a day or so. They'll be online advertising the next few events. So Kevin, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Always a pleasure. And thanks everyone for your participation and engagement. I really enjoyed our conversation today. AI free.
AI free.